The live stream from Paris was flawless, the connection unmarred by distance. From her silent, cavernous living room in New York, Aurelia watched the culmination of her husband's dream and her secret investment. The models were ethereal, the clothes a symphony of silk and ambition. Then, the camera panned to the front row. There was Lucas, her husband, his face alight with triumph. And beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, was a woman whose face Aurelia knew only from hushed whispers and deleted texts. She was wearing the show's centerpiece, a gown of midnight silk, a dress Aurelia had personally financed. The silence in their Fifth Avenue penthouse was a living thing. It breathed in the sterile spaces between the minimalist furniture and crept along the cold marble floors. For Aurelia, 8 months pregnant, the silence had become a constant companion, a heavy blanket she couldn't shrug off. She sat on a cream-colored sofa, one hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly, the other scrolling absently through a stock market app on her tablet. The numbers were a comfort. Cold, logical, and predictable. Unlike her marriage. Lucas was a whirlwind of charisma and ambition. The kind of man who didn't just enter a room, but conquered it. When they met, she had been captivated by his fire, his relentless drive to build something from nothing. He wanted to create a fashion empire, a brand called Aura that would redefine modern luxury. Aurelia, the sole heir to a logistics fortune, had the means to make it happen. But she knew Lucas's pride was as vast as his ambition. He would never accept a handout, so she had created a ghost. Through a series of shell corporations and a fiercely loyal family lawyer, she established ASC Holdings, an anonymous investment firm. It was her, of course. Every dollar that flowed into Aura, every lease signed, every fabric order placed, came from her. Lucas believed he had wooed a mysterious, reclusive European venture capitalist. He celebrated his powers of persuasion, never knowing his greatest triumph was, in fact, a gift from his wife. It was her secret, a testament to her love and her faith in him. Lately, however, the secret felt less like a gift and more like a wall. He was working later, his nights consumed by production issues and investor calls. His scent, once a familiar mix of sandalwood and clean linen, was now often tainted with a faint, floral perfume that wasn't hers. When he came home, his eyes would skim over her, his smile not quite reaching them. He'd kiss her forehead, his lips cool and distracted, before murmuring about a stressful day and disappearing into his study. "The collection for Paris is everything," he'd told her last week, his voice buzzing with an energy he no longer reserved for her. "This is the launchpad, Aurelia. After this, Aura isn't just a brand. It's a legacy, for us, for our son." He had held her then, his hand briefly covering hers on her stomach, but it felt like a gesture performed for an audience that wasn't there. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to. But her intuition, a sharp, cold needle, kept pricking at the edges of her hope. She had seen the name Maël flash on his phone screen once before he'd snatched it away, his face a mask of irritation. "A new assistant," he'd said, a little too quickly. "Utterly useless, but she handles the scheduling." Aurelia had learned long ago that the most powerful people weren't the loudest, but the most observant. Her father had taught her to read balance sheets and boardrooms, to see the truth hidden in the numbers and the unspoken tensions. Now, she applied those skills to her own life. She noticed the credit card statements with charges for dinners for two at places she'd never been. The sudden influx of silk shirts in his closet, a style he'd never worn before. She traced the rim of her water glass, leaving a damp circle on the polished wood of the side table. The baby kicked, a sudden reassuring thump against her ribs. She was building a life, a family, on a foundation she had secretly poured. But what if the ground was already fractured? What if, in her attempt to empower her husband, she had simply given him the freedom to betray her? The thought was a cold dread that seeped into her bones. She had invested millions, not just in a company, but in a man. In a future. The Paris Fashion Week debut was supposed to be their shared victory. Lucas was flying out in the morning. He had insisted she stay home, citing her pregnancy and the stress of travel. "I need you safe, darling. I'll call you the second the show is over. We'll celebrate then." She had agreed, playing the part of the docile, supportive wife. But as she sat there, in the gilded cage of their home, she made a different decision. She wouldn't be celebrating. She would be watching, as an investor, and as a wife who feared she was about to lose everything. Lucas straightened his tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling window of his office. The New York skyline glittered behind him, a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel. It was a view he'd coveted his entire life, a symbol that he had arrived. Aura's headquarters were sleek, modern, and ruinously expensive, a testament to his taste and, he believed, his talent for seduction. Not the romantic kind, but the far more potent corporate kind. He had convinced ASC Holdings, a notoriously private and discerning firm, to bet on him. The weight of that bet was a physical pressure on his chest. Every decision, every dollar was scrutinized by their faceless representatives through encrypted emails. They were demanding, precise, and approved of his vision. But the pressure to deliver was immense. Paris had to be a home run, not just for the brand, but for him. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He loved Aurelia. He truly did. He loved her quiet strength, her sharp mind, her unwavering belief in him. But her world was one of effortless privilege, of inherited security. She couldn't understand the gnawing hunger of a man who'd started with nothing, the desperate need to prove he was worthy, not just of her, but of the life she had so easily given him. Her love felt maternal at times, a soft, unconditional safety net. And then there was Maëlle. Maëlle was not a safety net. She was a tightrope. She was a fiery, ambitious design assistant he'd hired 6 months ago. She saw him not as Aurelia's husband, but as Lucas Devereaux, the visionary. She didn't look at him with gentle adoration. She looked at him with a hungry ambition that mirrored his own. With her, he wasn't the man who'd married into wealth. He was the master of his own universe. Their affair had started with late nights at the office, a shared bottle of whiskey, and her breathless admiration for his designs. It was a potent, addictive cocktail of ego and desire. "The final look is packed. The pièce de résistance." Maëlle's voice purred from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, a vision in a sharp black dress. "It's going to be a sensation." She was talking about the midnight silk gown, a dress he'd agonized over for weeks. It was the embodiment of aura, elegant, daring, and impossibly expensive. "It has to be," he said, turning from the window. "ASC Holdings is expecting a 20% media value increase post-show. Their analytics team is thorough." Maëlle sauntered in, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. She ran a finger along the lapel of his suit. "Forget them. This is your moment. You've earned it." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with something that felt like worship. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that front row seat next to you is still empty. It would be a shame for the designer to celebrate his victory alone." The suggestion hung in the air, shimmering with risk. It was a brazen, reckless idea, and it thrilled him. Aurelia, bless her heart, would be asleep, trusting him completely. She had accepted his excuse about her health without a second thought. The image of her, serene and pregnant, flashed in his mind, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. but the guilt was quickly suffocated by a more powerful feeling: resentment. He was tired of feeling like a kept man, the consort to a quiet queen. This was his empire, built on his vision. He deserved to have the person who truly understood the struggle by his side. "It's a risk," he said, the words a weak protest against a decision he'd already made. "Everything worth having is a risk," Maëlle countered, her hand sliding from his lapel down his chest. "Besides, who would know? It's Paris. We're a world away." A world away. It sounded like freedom. He imagined the flash of cameras, the roar of applause, and Maëlle beside him, her presence a testament not to his wife's money, but to his own desirability, his own power. He was building a legacy for his son, yes, but he was also building it for himself. He needed to feel like the king of his own castle, not just a resident in a penthouse paid for by a trust fund. "Fine," he heard himself say, "but you're there as my assistant. We have to be discreet." Maëlle's smile was slow and triumphant. "Of course, Lucas. Your assistant." She picked a piece of lint from his shoulder, her touch lingering. "Now, about my wardrobe for the evening. I was thinking something that really represents the brand. Something iconic." He knew exactly what she meant. The midnight silk gown. Giving it to her to wear was the ultimate act of defiance, a secret coronation. It was a betrayal so profound, so specific, that a part of him recoiled from it. But another, darker part, the part that chafed under the weight of Aurelia's quiet perfection, was exhilarated. "I'll have it sent to your hotel," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. He was Lucas Devereux. He was in control, and in Paris, he would finally be the man he was always meant to be, with the woman who saw him as such. Paris was a city of light, but for Aurelia, it was a city of shadows. The live stream began at 3 p.m. New York time. She had drawn the curtains in the living room, plunging the vast space into a twilight gloom. The only light came from the 80-inch television screen, a glowing portal to a world she was supposed to be a part of. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and hope. She prayed she was wrong. She prayed for her suspicions to be nothing more than the paranoid fantasies of a hormonal, pregnant woman. The show began. A haunting, minimalist beat pulsed from the screen as the first model strode onto the runway. The clothes were magnificent. Aurelia felt a swell of pride, a genuine, unadulterated joy. This was her money, yes, but it was Lucas's vision, the fabrics she'd sourced, the artisans she'd approved. It was all there, brought to life. She saw the clean lines, the innovative tailoring, the audacious yet elegant aesthetic that was pure Lucas. Aura was real. It was brilliant. She leaned forward, her earlier fears momentarily forgotten, captivated by the artistry. She analyzed the flow of the garments, the reactions of the audience in the fleeting crowd shots. She saw stoic-faced fashion editors, influential bloggers typing furiously on their phones, and the general awe that signaled a successful debut. Lucas had done it. They had done it. The finale approached. The music swelled, and the final model appeared in a breathtaking cascade of shimmering fabric. It was a dress that seemed woven from the night sky itself, adorned with tiny, hand-stitched crystals that glittered like distant stars. The midnight silk gown. The pièce de résistance. Aurelia held her breath. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The camera followed the model to the end of the runway, where she paused as the applause erupted. Then, as the models did their final walk, the camera panned, sweeping across the front row to capture the reaction of the industry's elite. And there he was, Lucas. He was on his feet, clapping, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. He looked radiant, powerful, every inch the visionary the world would now believe him to be. The camera lingered on him, and in that moment, Aurelia's world tilted on its axis. Beside him, also on her feet, was a woman. Her fiery red hair was a stark contrast to the darkness of her dress. She was beautiful, with sharp, intelligent features and a smile that radiated a fierce, proprietary pride. She turned to Lucas, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her fingers squeezing possessively. He turned to her, and the public mask of the triumphant designer dissolved into something far more intimate. He smiled at her. A real, unguarded smile, the one Aurelia hadn't seen in months, and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. The woman laughed, and the camera zoomed in slightly. Aurelia's breath hitched. She was wearing the dress. Not a copy. Not a similar design. She was wearing the one-of-a-kind finale runway gown, the midnight silk masterpiece that was supposed to be the symbol of Aura's launch. It was on his mistress. The room went cold. The sound of the applause, the music, the distant New York traffic, it all faded into a deafening roar in Aurelia's ears. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a woman in Paris. This was a statement. He hadn't just taken a lover to his moment of triumph. He had crowned her his queen, dressing her in the very fabric of their shared dream. A dream she had funded. A legacy she had intended for their child. Every late night, every vague excuse, every dismissive kiss on the forehead clicked into place, forming a picture of betrayal so complete, so utterly contemptuous, that it stole the air from her lungs. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had mocked her. He had taken her faith, her love, her money, and used it to adorn his infidelity on the world stage. The baby kicked, a sharp, violent jab, as if sensing its mother's agony. Aurelia didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on the screen, as Lucas and the woman in the midnight dress basked in the glow of their shared success. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over her. The love she had felt for him, the warm, vibrant thing that had sustained her, flickered and died, leaving behind something hard and cold and sharp. ASC Holdings had made a significant investment, and ASC Holdings always protected its assets. The show was over. The applause was fading. But for Aurelia, the real work was just beginning. The hours after the live stream bled into one another, a gray, featureless expanse of time. The television was off. The penthouse plunged back into its familiar oppressive silence. Aurelia didn't move from the sofa. She didn't eat. She didn't answer the calls that started coming in. First from her mother, then from a few close friends who would have seen the news from Paris. They would be calling to congratulate her on Lucas's success. The irony was a bitter acid in her throat. Her first instinct was primal, a visceral urge to shatter something, to scream, to call him, and unleash a torrent of rage and pain. She imagined the confrontation, her voice cracking with tears, his inevitable, pathetic excuses, the hollow apologies that would follow. The thought of it, the sheer, undignified mess of it all, made her feel weak. And Aurelia had never allowed herself to be weak. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A lesson from a lifetime ago, delivered in a sterile boardroom after a competitor had tried a hostile takeover. Never react with emotion, Aurelia. Emotion is a wildfire. It burns everything to the ground, including you. The deadliest weapon is patience. Observe, gather information, and then, when they believe they are safest, you strike. She had been a girl then, but she had understood. Power wasn't about shouting. It was about strategy. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself up from the sofa. Her movements were stiff, her body aching with a sorrow so profound it felt physical. She walked to the window, the same one Lucas had stood before just that morning, and looked out at the city. The glittering lights no longer looked like a kingdom. They looked like a battlefield. The tears finally came, but they were not the hot, messy tears of a heartbroken wife. They were cold, silent tears that traced paths down her cheeks. She cried for the man she thought she had married. She cried for the future she had so carefully planned. And she cried for the child inside her, a child whose father had just proven himself to be a stranger. When the tears stopped, something new had taken their place. A steely resolve, a chilling focus. The grief was still there, a hard, dense knot in her chest, but it was now encased in ice. She went to her home office, a room Lucas rarely entered, considering it her hobby space. On her desk, a sleek laptop sat closed. She opened it, the screen casting a cool blue light on her face. With steady fingers, she began to type. She wasn't looking for lawyers or divorce papers. Not yet. That was a conventional weapon, and this was an unconventional war. She logged into the encrypted portal for ASC Holdings. Her access was absolute. She could see every invoice, every projection, every line item of expenditure for Aura. Lucas saw only the polished reports her lawyer, Benedict Hawthorne, prepared for him. Aurelia saw the raw data. She started with Paris. The numbers told a story that was even uglier than the one on the live stream. The official budget for the show was high, but manageable. But the overages were staggering. She saw the suite booked at the George Fourth, not for him, but under a consultant's name, Maël Duclair. She saw the lavish team dinners at 3-star Michelin restaurants, the receipts for jewelry from Place Vendôme listed as talent gifts, the exorbitant fee paid to a backstage assistant who also happened to be Maël Duclair. He wasn't just cheating. He was stealing. He was embezzling from their future, from their child's legacy, to fund a sordid affair. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She drafted an email to Benedict Hawthorne. Her instructions were precise. Effective immediately, I want a full audit of all of Aura's operational expenses for the past 6 months. Flag all unapproved expenditures over $1,000. I want a detailed report on all independent contractor payments. Furthermore, I want to call an emergency performance review with Mr. Devereaux. The post-show media value is excellent, but the capital burn rate is unsustainable. Schedule it for the day after he returns from Paris. He will be tired, overconfident, and unprepared. The review will be conducted by you via video conference. The board of ASC Holdings is concerned. She paused, her finger hovering over the send button. This was it. The first move. The first subtle tightening of the noose. She was no longer Aurelia St. Clair, the loving, pregnant wife. She was ASC Holdings, the silent, watchful investor, the architect of his success, and now the architect of his reckoning. She would not confront him about Maël. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her pain. She would let him walk back into their home, drunk on his own success, and into a cage he didn't even know existed. She would let him lie to her face, while she held the power to destroy his entire world in the palm of her hand. She hit send. The silence of the penthouse no longer felt oppressive. It felt strategic. It was the quiet before the storm. Lucas returned from Paris 2 days later, walking into the penthouse like a conquering hero. He was glowing, his skin sun-kissed from a day trip to the coast he'd squeezed in, his eyes bright with the lingering adrenaline of his success. He dropped his bags, strode over to Aurelia, and pulled her into an embrace that felt both theatrical and hollow. "We did it, darling. We actually did it," he said, his voice booming in the quiet apartment. He kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that tasted of expensive whiskey and deceit. Aurelia remained perfectly, pliantly still in his arms, her body a study in masterful control. She did not flinch, She did not recoil. She even managed to summon a weak, tired smile. "I saw," she said, her voice a soft murmur against his chest. "It was incredible, Lucas. The clothes, they were everything you said they would be." He pulled back, beaming, his ego preening under her praise. "Weren't they? The reviews are ecstatic. Vogue called it a stunning debut from a formidable new talent." "A formidable new talent? Can you believe it?" "I always believed it," she said. And the truth in those words was a sharp, painful barb in her own heart. He led her to the sofa, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. He smelled of stale airplane air and the faint, cloying scent of that other woman's perfume, a ghost that now clung to him. Aurelia fought the urge to gag. "I missed you like crazy," he lied, his thumb stroking her arm. "It wasn't the same without you. Celebrating alone felt so empty." The lie was so bald, so effortless, that it was almost impressive. She thought of the photo she'd seen on a fashion blog that morning, a candid shot of him and Maëlle leaving a Parisian nightclub, their heads close together, laughing. The caption read, "Designer Lucas Devereaux celebrates his triumphant debut with his stunning assistant, Maëlle Duclair." "It must have been exhausting," Aurelia said, her voice a model of wifely concern. "All that press, the parties." "A total nightmare," he agreed, shaking his head with mock weariness. "You know how I hate that stuff. I just locked myself in the hotel room most nights and worked. I wanted to get home to you and the little guy." He patted her stomach, a gesture that now felt like a violation. Aurelia's control was a thin sheet of ice over a raging sea. She could feel it cracking, the fury and grief threatening to break through. She had to change the subject, to steer him onto the battlefield she had prepared. "Well, you can't rest for long," she said, injecting a note of gentle apology into her tone. Benedict Hawthorne's office called. "ASC Holdings wants a performance review. This afternoon." Lucas's smile tightened. The glow in his eyes dimmed. "What? Today? I just got off a 7-hour flight." "I know. I told them you were tired, but they were insistent," Aurelia said, feigning helplessness. "They said something about the capital burn rate being higher than projected for the launch." He stiffened, pulling his arm from around her. "The burn rate? The show was a smash hit. You have to spend money to make money. Don't they understand how this works?" His voice was sharp with indignation, the frustration of a king being questioned by his exchequer. "I'm sure it's just a formality," Aurelia soothed, her voice smooth as silk. "They're investors, darling. They worry about numbers. You just need to walk them through it. You're brilliant at that." She was poisoning him with his own ego. He preened slightly, his confidence returning. "You're right. Of course, you're right. It's probably just their European way of doing things. All process and no vision. Fine. I'll handle it." He stood up and went to his study to prepare, leaving her alone in the silent living room. Aurelia closed her eyes, her body trembling with the strain of her performance. Every lie he told, every false endearment, was another piece of evidence, another reason to see this through to its cold, bitter end. She had given him the chance to tell the truth, a tiny, unspoken window of opportunity. He had not only failed to take it, he had sealed it shut with more lies. An hour later, he was ensconced in his study, the door firmly closed for his video conference. Aurelia sat in her own office down the hall, a pair of high-end wireless earbuds in her ears. She had instructed Benedict Hawthorne to patch the audio of the call through to her. It was a gross invasion of privacy. It was also a necessary act of war. She heard Lucas's confident, charming voice as he greeted Hawthorne. He started by boasting about the media impressions, the celebrity placements, the overwhelming success of the show. Then Hawthorne, his voice dry and emotionless, cut him off. "Mr. Devereaux, we appreciate the qualitative success. However, the board's concerns are quantitative. Let's start with the unbudgeted expenses from Paris. Can you explain the nearly $200,000 in overages? The sweet poison was beginning to work. Aurelia leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and listened to her husband begin to drown. The performance review was the first cut. Lucas emerged from his study hours later, his face pale and drawn. The triumphant glow was gone, replaced by a thunderous scowl. He didn't speak to Aurelia, just poured himself a large whiskey and stared out the window, his back rigid with fury. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice soft. "They're bean counters, Aurelia," he snapped, whirling around. "They have no soul. They questioned every single line item. They want me to justify the cost of the champagne at the after-party. Can you believe it? It's Aura. It's a luxury brand. The details matter." "I'm sure they do," she murmured, turning a page in her book, the picture of calm. But behind the scenes, ASC Holdings was just getting started. Aurelia, guided by the cold, precise mind of Benedict Hawthorne, began a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts. It was a slow, meticulous assault, designed not to raise alarm but to create a constant, gnawing pressure that would fray Lucas's nerves and expose his incompetence. The first memo from ASC Holdings demanded a new, more rigorous expense approval process. Any expenditure over $5,000 now required a co-signature from a representative of the firm, Benedict Hawthorne. Suddenly, Lucas's corporate card, which he had used with impunity to fund his lavish lifestyle with Mel, was a leash. "This is insulting," he raged after a dinner with Maëlle at a chic new restaurant was declined. "They're treating me like a child." Next, ASC Holdings began to question his creative decisions. An email arrived, penned by Hawthorne but composed by Aurelia, questioning the Q3 production plan. "The board feels the proposed line of silk evening wear is too niche for the current market. Our data analysis suggests a pivot towards luxury knitwear, and high-end casuals would capture a larger market share and offer a higher ROI. Please provide a revised production strategy by end of week." This was a direct attack on his vision. The evening wear was his passion project, the heart of the brand as he saw it. To have it questioned by faceless number crunchers sent him into a spiral. He spent days locked in his office, trying to draft a response that defended his artistry while appeasing his ruthless investors. Aurelia, meanwhile, was working with a secret team of designers she had contracted, developing the very knitwear line she had suggested. They worked out of a small, unmarked studio in Brooklyn, a space she paid for in cash. She was building a shadow collection, a safety net for the company she intended to one day reclaim. The pressure began to affect Lucas's relationship with Maëlle. The clandestine dinners were replaced by tense arguments over the phone. Maëlle, who had been attracted to his power and success, was quickly losing patience with his newfound anxiety and frugality. "What do you mean you can't get me the Birkin?" Aurelia overheard him hiss into his phone one evening, thinking she was asleep. "Maëlle, I'm not liquid right now. No, it's not that I don't want to. It's the investors. They're watching everything." The final cut of the month was the deepest. ASC Holdings, citing concerns about bloated operational costs, instituted a temporary hiring freeze and a full review of all independent contractor roles. This was Aurelia's checkmate. Maëlle Duclair, who held a lucrative but vaguely defined consultant position, was at the top of the list for review. Lucas had to personally submit a detailed justification for her role, including a full breakdown of her hours and deliverables. It was an impossible task. Her position was a sham, a way to funnel company money to his mistress. To document it would be to create a paper trail of his affair and his embezzlement. To fire her would be to incur Maëlle's wrath and lose the one thing that made him feel powerful. He was trapped. Aurelia watched him pace their apartment night after night, his face etched with a panic he tried to hide from her. He grew thin, his temper short. He looked at her sometimes with a strange, hunted expression, as if wondering if she knew, if she could see the walls closing in on him. She would simply smile, offer him a cup of tea, and ask if he was feeling all right. She was the perfect, concerned wife. She was his nurse, his confidant, his executioner. Every gentle touch was a turn of the screw. Every soft word of encouragement was another shovel of dirt on the grave he was digging for himself. She was patient, she was methodical, and she was enjoying watching him squirm. The world Lucas Devereaux had so carefully constructed was beginning to fracture. The constant pressure from ASC Holdings felt like a low-grade fever, leaving him perpetually exhausted and irritable. His days were spent in a defensive crouch, endlessly justifying his decisions to the disembodied voice of Benedict Hawthorne, who had become the bane of his existence. The joy of his Parisian triumph had curdled into a bitter memory of a freedom he no longer possessed. His relationship with Maëlle became the primary casualty of his stress. The hiring review hung over them like a guillotine. He couldn't fire her, but he couldn't justify her salary either. He stalled, creating meaningless projects and falsifying timesheets, acts of desperation that only deepened his anxiety. Their clandestine meetings were no longer filled with breathless admiration and passion. They were tense, fraught negotiations. "You have to do something, Lucas," Maëlle insisted during a hushed, frantic meeting in a coffee shop miles from his office. "They're going to fire me. I'll have nothing." "What do you want me to do?" he snapped, his voice a harsh whisper. "They have me on a financial chokehold. I can't make a move without their approval. This isn't what I signed up for." "You are Aura," she shot back, her voice rising. "They invested in you. Start acting like it. Tell them to back off." But he couldn't. He had tried to project an image of authority, but Hawthorne was implacable. Lucas was beginning to suspect that ASC Holdings wasn't just a group of demanding investors. There was something personal in their methodical dismantling of his authority. It felt less like business and more like a vendetta. But from whom? He had no enemies powerful enough to orchestrate this. At home, Aurelia was a vision of serene tranquility. Her pregnancy had softened her features, and she moved through the penthouse with a quiet grace that grated on his raw nerves. Her constant, gentle concern felt suffocating. "You seem stressed, darling," she'd say, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "Maybe you should take a step back, delegate more." "Delegate to whom?" he'd retort. "The investors have frozen all new hires." "Oh, that's right," she'd say with a soft, sympathetic frown. "It does seem like they're being awfully strict." Her placid agreement was more infuriating than an argument would have been. He felt a growing, paranoid suspicion. How could she be so calm when the company they had both poured their dreams into was being systematically undermined? Sometimes he would catch her looking at him, her expression unreadable, and a chill would run down his spine. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen, cool and detached. The breaking point came in the form of a fabric shipment. Lucas had ordered a rare, iridescent charmeuse from a specialty mill in Italy for his next collection. It was wildly expensive, an indulgence he knew ASC Holdings would never approve. So he had tried to bury the cost, splitting the invoice and miscategorizing the expense. A week later, he received a curt email from Hawthorne. "Mr. Devereaux, ASC Holdings has canceled the order with the Italian mill. This is a violation of the approved budget. Furthermore, we have sourced an alternative, more cost-effective material from a supplier in Portugal. The new fabric is already in transit to your workshops." Lucas saw red. They had gone behind his back. They had countermanded his creative decision and replaced his vision with a cheap substitute. He stormed through the penthouse, looking for Aurelia, needing someone to vent his rage at. He found her in the nursery, calmly folding tiny baby clothes and placing them in a dresser. The room was painted a soft, gentle yellow, and sunlight streamed through the window. It was an oasis of peace in his chaotic world. "They canceled the Italian silk," he said, his voice tight with fury. Aurelia looked up from a tiny pair of socks, her expression mild. Oh, why would they do that? They said it was too expensive. They've replaced it with some cheap garbage from Portugal. They're destroying the integrity of the brand. They're destroying me. He was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists. Well, Aurelia said slowly, folding another tiny shirt with deliberate care. They are the investors, Lucas. They hold the purse strings. If you can't control your spending, I suppose it makes sense that they would. Her simple, irrefutable logic was like a slap in the face. He stopped pacing and stared at her. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his gentle, supportive wife. He was looking at a stranger. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only a cool, unnerving clarity. "Whose side are you on?" he asked, the question hanging in the air, heavy and poisonous. Aurelia met his gaze, her own eyes as clear and hard as diamonds. She placed a folded blanket on the pile and smoothed it with her hand. "I am on the side of the investment," she said softly. "I am on the side of our son's future, a future which you, with your recklessness and your extravagances, seem determined to jeopardize." The way she said extravagances was chilling. It was a word that could mean anything and everything. The ground beneath Lucas's feet gave way. The paranoia, the suspicion, the feeling of being watched, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying certainty. She knew. He didn't know how, but he knew that she knew. And she had been watching him fall, silently, patiently, for weeks. The architect of his torment wasn't a faceless firm in Europe. It was his pregnant wife, standing in the nursery of their unborn child. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. The email from ASC Holdings was brief and brutal. The subject line read, "Mandatory review of leadership and financial viability." Lucas knew this was it. This was the execution. He spent the weekend in a state of suspended terror. He and Aurelia moved around each other like ghosts in their own home. The silence thick with unspoken accusations. He tried to access company funds to hire a lawyer, but his accounts were frozen. He tried to call his contacts in the industry, but word of Aura's instability, of the iron-fisted control of its mysterious investors, had already spread. No one wanted to touch him. He was an outcast. He thought about confessing, about throwing himself at Aurelia's mercy. He would tell her everything, about Maëlle, the money, the crushing weight of his own insecurity. But when he looked at her, at the cold disappointment in her eyes, he knew it was too late for mercy. She wasn't his wife anymore. She was his judge. The meeting was to be held at the neutral ground of Benedict Hawthorne's downtown law office. The boardroom was an intimidating space of dark wood and smoked glass, overlooking the financial district. Lucas sat at the head of the long, polished table, feeling small and exposed. Benedict Hawthorne sat to his right, his face as impassive as a stone carving. A large screen on the wall was blank, waiting for the remote members of the board to dial in. "Shall we begin?" Hawthorne asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Aren't we waiting for the rest of the board?" Lucas asked, his own voice sounding thin and reedy. "They are already here," Hawthorne said. As he spoke, the door to the boardroom opened. Aurelia walked in. She was not the soft, pregnant woman he lived with. She was dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue maternity dress that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was pale, her expression resolute. She moved with a confidence and authority he had never seen in her before. She carried a leather portfolio and took a seat directly opposite him at the table. Lucas's blood ran cold. He stared at her, his mouth agape. "Aurelia, what are you doing here?" She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it, not looking at him. "I'm here to represent the primary shareholder of ASC Holdings," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with an unfamiliar power in the silent room. Me. The confession hit Lucas with the force of a physical blow. ASC Holdings, Aurelia St. Clair Holdings, her initials. It had been right in front of him the entire time, a joke he was too arrogant to understand. His mysterious, brilliant backer was the woman he had been lying to for months. The fortune he'd been so proud of securing was the same one he'd resented her for possessing. "Let's get started," Aurelia continued, her gaze finally lifting to meet his. It was cold, dispassionate, and utterly unforgiving. "Mr. Hawthorne, please bring up the first slide." The screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a detailed breakdown of the Paris Fashion Week overages. One by one, Aurelia went through the charges, her voice clinical and precise. Exhibit A. A suite at the George Famfif Hotel, booked for 5 nights at a cost of $28,000 for a consultant, Ms. Mail Duclair. "Lucas, can you please explain what services Ms. Duclair, a design assistant on a $60,000 salary, provided to the company that necessitated a presidential suite?" Lucas couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his mind a white-hot panic. Exhibit B, a charge from Cartier for $72,000, listed as talent acquisition. The recipient of this acquisition was also Ms. Duclair. Was this a bonus? If so, it wasn't approved by the board. She continued, her voice never wavering. She laid out every lie, every theft, every betrayal, not with the emotion of a scorned wife, but with the cold, hard evidence of a prosecutor. She presented the falsified invoices, the padded expense reports, the payments for a mistress disguised as business costs. She connected his financial mismanagement directly to his infidelity, showing the board, showing him, that they were one and the same. He wasn't just a bad husband, he was a bad businessman, a risk to the company's future. When she was finished, she closed her portfolio. The silence in the room was absolute. Lucas could hear the frantic pounding of his own heart. He looked at Aurelia, truly looked at her for the first time in a long time. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the brilliant, capable woman he had underestimated and disrespected. He had mistaken her quiet love for weakness, her support for subservience. He had been a fool. "The board of ASC Holdings," Aurelia said, her voice dropping slightly, the first hint of emotion finally breaking through the ice, "has lost all faith in your leadership. We are invoking the morals clause in your contract. Effective immediately, you are terminated as CEO of Aura. You will vacate the company premises by the end of the day. Your shares will be bought out at their initial value, as per our agreement. You are left with exactly what you started with. Nothing." She stood up, her hand going to her stomach in a gesture that was both protective and powerful. "Our lawyers will be in touch regarding the divorce," she said, her voice now just a whisper, meant only for him. "And the custody of our son." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lucas alone in the sterile boardroom, surrounded by the wreckage of the life he had so carelessly destroyed. The reckoning was complete. Aurelia's story is a powerful testament to the quiet strength that often lies dormant, waiting for a moment of profound betrayal to awaken it. She transformed her pain into power, not with loud confrontations, but with silent, strategic precision. Lucas's downfall wasn't just about losing a company. It was about the shattering of his own inflated ego, forcing him to confront the man he had become. Aura, rebranded under Aurelia's sole leadership, went on to become a global powerhouse, celebrated not just for its designs, but for its ethical foundation and support of female artisans. Her journey reminds us that the greatest empires are not built on lies, but on the unshakable bedrock of integrity and self-worth. What did you think of Aurelia's ultimate revenge? Was it justice, or was it cold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more stories of epic reckoning.